Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Riches. Today we hear from the Labour Party in the run-up to the European and local elections in the form of Nick Dakin, Member of Parliament for Scunthorpe since 2010. Nick, many thanks for coming in.
It's a pleasure, Hugh.
I've been researching and looking and trying to find a Labour Party policy on Europe, and I can't find anything that I would define as a policy. What is Labour's attitude to Europe?
Well, Labour's got a very clear position on Europe, which is we're in favour of being in the European Union, and we feel there are huge benefits that have come to us, not least peace for many, many decades now as a result of the European Union, but also relative prosperity. And they're things that we take for granted at our peril. However, the European Union does need to change. It does need to get closer to people. And that's why we're arguing for the European Union to get its act better together. For example, 1.5% of the economic activity of Europe is on agriculture, yet 40% of the European budget is currently spent on the common agricultural policy. Well, that can't be right. That needs to be adjusted. That's the sort of thing that needs to change in the future so that Europe gets more in line with the needs of the people of Europe.
Other parties have offered the possibility of a referendum on continued British membership of Europe. The Conservative Party and obviously UKIP would like that. The Liberal Party definitely wants to stay in Europe.
That's right.
Labour also would offer a referendum and would continue to stay in Europe. Is there no reason that you might think you should go to the country on that issue?
Well, let's put it, people can make promises about the future, but actually the only party to have ever given the British people a referendum on Europe is the Labour Party. And at that moment in time, the British people voted in favour of being in the European Union. What we have said very clearly is that to have a referendum now on being in Europe would be a distraction from the priorities of Britain, which is to get the economy going, to tackle the cost of living crisis that this government has caused, and put things on an even street. So they're the priorities. Messing about with referendums on Europe would just be a distraction from the main issue. However, we have made it very clear that if there are significant changes in the European Union Treaty in the future, we would put any changes to the British people. Interestingly, the last really big set of changes was the Maastricht Treaty, which was negotiated by Mrs Thatcher. And Mrs Thatcher didn't think it was significant enough to put to the British people at that time. But if there were changes of that nature again in the future under a Labour government, that's what we would do.
You mentioned that the membership of the European Union increases British prosperity.
Absolutely.
That's one of those statistical and economical things that's difficult to measure in one step. Others would say that just the institutional cost of being in Europe, the fee, as it were, for being in Europe is far too high. What would happen economically in the Labour's point of view? What would be the economic consequence of withdrawal from Europe?
Well, I represent a steel town, and one of the major markets for steel is in Europe, and the people making the decisions about the future of the steelworks, largest steelworks in this country, in Scunthorpe, they're making the decision in India, not in Europe or in the UK. And so when you look from that perspective, and we listen to what people are telling us, they would prefer much for us to remain in Europe because that strengthens Britain's case for having investment, for foreign investment. If you look at what EEF, the Manufacturers Association, have said recently, they've said it would be disastrous for manufacturing if Britain came out of Europe. And that's not politicians of any flavour saying things, that's people who know about business, know about manufacturing.
Well, this is a refreshing thing to hear from a Labour Party politician, that you're in support of big business here, you're in support of capital, you're in support of the bosses here, and that you're praying them in aid of your case. Is this a usual position from your side of the House?
Well, I think all politicians are in favour of jobs. Jobs are what make the difference to people's welfare and their lives and their well-being. If people have got jobs, their lives are much more positive. And essentially, it's the responsibility of both management and workers to deliver prosperous futures for our businesses. And therefore, what the bosses are saying is important, but also what trade unions are saying is important. And I think when I listen to both sides of that argument from an engineering and a manufacturing background, what they're saying is that the European Union offers more benefits than disbenefits.
You said that if there were big institutional changes, then Labour might contemplate offering a referendum.
No, the leader, Ed Miliband, has made it very clear if there were big changes, future treaty changes, there would be a referendum.
You mentioned Maastricht. I think the latest sort of constitutional change, as it were, is probably the Lisbon Treaty of 2009, yes, which gave much more power to the Parliament, which is the democratic institution, yeah, of the European Union, and thus giving it a much greater authority. Now, what would be the Labour position if the European Union had that much increased, greater democratic authority, that the mandate lies in the European government rather than in a merely national one?
Well, national governments need to have their, need to be in charge of their own sovereignty, and that's very important. And that's why, for example, Britain is not part of the euro, because that's a decision that the national government made quite rightly to stay out of the euro.
Well, Labour was arguing that it should go into the euro.
No. It was the Labour government that negotiated the opt-out from the euro. It wasn't anybody else. So Labour has got a very clear position on this in terms of the past government made the position on the euro, and that has put us in a very strong position now, so that we have the benefits of being part of the European Union, but we don't have the negative impact of being within the euro at this point in time.
These coming elections locally here, you hold quite a strong Labour seat. And this is the traditional industrial heartland of England. But the small parties are going to damage you as much as they're going to damage the Conservatives and the Liberals. UKIP and also the Greens. What is this vote against the big parties? Why?
Well, I think sadly in the European elections, the party that will probably get the most votes is the party that doesn't vote at all, the stay-at-home party in reality. And I think
voters who stay at home lose the right to complain, don't they?
Well, not in my experience. Staying at home doesn't prevent them complaining when they want to as well, although I tend to have some sympathy with your point of view, Hugh, on that people should participate in the democracy in the elections. I think it was Winston Churchill who said democracy is the least bad form of government, and I think all of us involved in politics would sign up to that. Actually, governance provides a good structure for things that go on, which is the reason why it is important to participate in elections.
But my point is that a lot of people are going to vote as a protest, as it were,
absolutely,
anti-politics vote. They're going to be voting for these small parties. Is Labour's position in the local elections as well as the European elections in danger from the small parties?
I think we have to take what people are telling us on the doorstep seriously. So where people are disengaged and unhappy with what Labour is offering, we need to listen to what they're saying, and we need to explain to them better than we perhaps have that we're the only party that's made commitments on freezing energy bills, on tackling the rents crisis, on doing all those sort of issues to tackle the cost of living crisis.
National issues rather than local or
well,
European
no,
issues.
they are the issues. When I'm knocking on doorsteps in Scunthorpe, they're the issues that people are telling me they're concerned about.
Yes,
they're
but the local authority can't do anything about the train prices. That's an issue that's reserved to national government, as it were.
Yes, but I think that illustrates the fact that when people are voting in elections like European elections, they're not voting simply on European issues or on local issues. People vote on how they feel about the performance of the parties at the time, and it's their prerogative to do that. So in some ways, and European elections are they're basically an opportunity for the electorate to tell the political classes how they're feeling at the time, and they've got every right to do that. And it's not uncommon for them to say, hold on a minute, we think you should be taking green issues a bit more seriously. The Green Party did very well in a few European elections. Or we need to take issues around immigration more seriously, which would, for example, show that UKIP might, a vote for UKIP might be giving that message. And they're important messages for us to receive.
Well, we'll be coming on to a couple of those issues in the second half, especially the idea of why is immigration such a big issue in this. But we'll also be talking about the demographics of your voters. But for the moment, we'll have to break. Nick Dakin, forgive me. Please join us after this short break. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to Nick Dakin, Labour MP for Scunthorpe. Nick, just before we broke, we were talking about the impact of the smaller parties. UKIP especially is taking the traditional Labour white working class vote. Now, the Labour Party is a left-wing party. It has an ideology, a philosophy that's been inherited over the last 100 years or so of the left. UKIP is a right-wing party, a libertarian party in some ways, quite apart from its nationalism. Why is the white working class changing ideology? Or are they changing party irrespective of ideology?
I don't think they are changing ideology. I think first of all, class is a tricky thing these days to talk about, and it maybe is seeing it through a lens of the past rather than the lens of the present.
Just as a counter of votes, as a demographic, as a marketing sort of category. I know it's a very vague one, but one has to break up the electorate if one's to analyse what's going on in the vote somehow. And so forgive me for
yes, I'm just saying that perhaps it's a lens of the past rather than a lens of the present. I think in reality, what you find across the United Kingdom is that nationalist parties have been on the rise, particularly in Scotland, and UKIP is really a nationalist English party, and therefore it will take votes from the traditional right and the traditional left. And really, the issue is about why voters are attracted to a nationalist party. And I think that's the thing that we have to engage with, which is really to listen to what voters are saying, which is that they feel a bit let down by politicians generally. And whether that's right or wrong, it's our job to engage with that and explain to them why they need to stick with where they're going to get their best bangs for their bucks, because in essence, a vote for Labour is a vote for tackling the cost of living, dealing with making sure the health service is delivering effectively, tackling injustice and unfairness, and those are the things that ring true on the doorstep as well. It's that people need to be reconnected with that.
I just want to nag this point one more time. You mentioned that the UKIP is a nationalist party. But so is the Scottish Nationalist Party.
Absolutely.
But that's a left-wing party. So is Plaid Cymru, but that's a left-wing party. They have a programme that's closer to socialism than it is to libertarian capitalism. Is your suggestion that the popularity of nationalism is more important to voters than the distinction between liberty and equality, as it were? That they care more about the nationality of who governs them than they do about how they're governed?
I think what I pick up when I'm talking to people on the doorstep is that they feel frustrated. They feel that the government isn't working for them, and they also, in their perception, often see people from other nations, from their perspective, doing better than they are, and that's a frustration, and it challenges identity as well. And people are, when people's identity is challenged, they become quite understandably concerned about their future. And I think those are what are driving people to say to the political classes, you need to think again about what you're doing and make sure that our borders are secure, that justice is being seen to be done, crime and disorder is being dealt with, and those sort of issues, those sort of core issues are important to people. And I think that's the message that I take away when I'm listening to people on doorsteps.
You mentioned the issue of immigration there, of course, which is terribly important, and that's one on which some of the other parties seem to be campaigning in this election. The Labour Party has acknowledged that it got it wrong with immigration during the last government. But would you close down the borders to the extent that the Conservatives and Liberals are trying to, or that UKIP would insist upon doing?
Of course, the current government has failed to stop the flow of immigration, despite what they've said. They haven't met any of their targets. So
but you would want the same targets.
That, in a sense, demonstrates that immigration is a complicated issue, and the reason that people come to the UK is to work primarily, and to work in factories and in agriculture where employers have found difficulty in recruiting indigenous labour, and that's sadly at the heart of the problem. Without those people coming to work in our factories, we wouldn't get chickens on our table at the price that we're buying them, and those sort of equations need to be looked at. But what we do need to make sure, and the best and safest way of addressing these issues, is make sure that proper standards are being applied, the minimum wages being effectively, the national minimum wages being effectively enforced, so that and proper housing regulations are being enforced so that people aren't being brought over here not being paid the right amount of money and not being housed properly, because that then equalises the playing field and properly allows those better conditions properly put in place and maintained, mean that the work is far more likely to go to local people anyway, and it will drive up the economy in every way. Which way?
Move on, Nick Dakin, to some of the issues that you more want to talk about on a national level. You mentioned energy, transport, rent control and things like that. Your leader, Ed Miliband, speaks of these things as if were he in government, he would have the power to reduce the cost of transport or of energy or of rent by snapping his fingers. But it's not within a government's competence, is it, to say to a company, charge less for a railway ticket, make energy cheaper? How can he achieve these goals?
I think that each problem is a different issue. So in terms of energy, there's general recognition that the energy market is not properly working. There's 6 major energy suppliers and it's not working as effectively as a competitive market, and everybody recognises that. So something needs to happen to make that market work in the interest of consumers. Well, it needs to be restructured, and that's why Ed Miliband has said that he would freeze energy prices for 18 months whilst the restructuring took place.
How can government freeze energy prices? These are private operations. There's a free contract between a purchaser and a seller of this good, this commodity. How can government step in and say, right, no, you cannot come to the price that you've agreed at?
Well, it can do, and it will do. And what's
legislation?
What's really interesting, Hugh, is that since Ed Miliband has said that, and the initial response from the Prime Minister was that this was ridiculous, in actual fact, the Prime Minister's then been playing catch-up in the government. And interestingly, we then had energy companies stepping forward and indeed themselves holding back, restraining themselves from putting up prices. So that shows what political leadership in opposition can achieve. Frankly, I'd like to see political leadership from Ed Miliband in government, because if he can achieve that in opposition, wait to see what he can achieve in government.
Just come back to the local here, your constituency of Scunthorpe. There are various local political issues there. There's a new development at the football ground.
That's right.
That's raised a certain amount of controversy, that people who have shops in the centre of town think that's an unfair competition. People who like shopping think it's a delightful place to go. Where are you, Nick?
Well, we'll find out whether it's a delightful place to go. I'm sure it will be, because the quality of people making it will make sure it's an excellent facility. I mean, Marks and Spencer's left the town centre a couple of years ago and will return to Scunthorpe in this new development, which is really positive for the Scunthorpe area. It would have been far better, probably, if Marks and Spencer's had chose to return to the town centre and thereby added a shot into in the arm for the town centre, because obviously town centres are important in the lifeblood of our communities, and you can understand why the retail outlets in the town centre are concerned about not Marks and Spencer's, frankly, but the other 5 or 6 units being used for competitive shopping down at Glanford Park. So, you know, it's a complicated picture. Overall, it's probably going to be beneficial for the area, but it does added to the...
One final point, sorry, Nick, to interrupt you. Right. But there's also this Channel 4 television programme, Skint, which has previously been filmed in Scunthorpe, possibility of it coming to Grimsby. It doesn't give Scunthorpe a very good national impression, does it?
Well, frankly, those people from Channel 4, and I was pleased to see that Channel 4's viewing figures are falling rapidly, because they deserve to, because those people from Channel 4 could have gone anywhere in the country to do a negative presentation of that part of the country, and I hope they don't come to Grimsby. They sadly chose to come to Scunthorpe. They filmed a lot of positive things, they filmed a wide variety of things, but they only chose to show negative things.
Have to stop you there, Nick. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching Hot Topic. Hope you'll join us next time. Cheerio, bye.